Okay, we did the 9 classes for Draw Steel, link in the doobly-doo. Time to talk about the Ancestries. There are 12 Ancestries in Draw Steel that we know of, and they cover the gamut from classic fantasy nonsense to slightly less classic fantasy nonsense. I'm going to go over each of them and give you a little commentary on our thinking. Why are these species like this? Why did we choose these 12 and not some other 12? Before we get started, remember, your class tells you what your best stats are. A censor starts with 2 might and 2 presence. Your ancestry doesn't affect your stats. But some ancestries are definitely beefier than others, some are sneakier than others. So the challenge was, can we make ancestries that deliver on the I am very strong or I am very sneaky fantasy without saying, well, here's a bonus to your stats? Because we want to avoid that scenario where certain ancestries are just better at certain classes, and people feel like they have to take that ancestry if they want to play that class. Did we succeed? Let's find out together. We begin up here at the top of the alphabet with Devils. First ancestry out of the gate, Devils from Hell. Satanic Panic? What's that? Devils are in this book for a lot of reasons. They are fun to play. People like them. We like them. It's not particularly radical in this day and age. We wanted a spread of ancestries that would let you play classic Fantasyland nonsense, but also urban fantasy and space fantasy. So even though all 12 of these ancestries get the same number of pages, we do not imagine all these different species are all equally represented in every village everywhere in the multiverse. Nope. We've got Vasloria for classic fantasy, and it's mostly human-oriented. Capital for urban intrigue, and it is incredibly multi-ethnic. And the Timescape for space fantasy, which has, like, aliens and stuff in it. Heroic fantasy makes sense in all of these settings, so we want to support all of them. And we don't know what kind of game you are running. We already see folks running Draw Steel in classic Fantasyland. We see folks running in a big city, and there are already people running Draw Steel in their own space fantasy setting, and some people are running in the Timescape. I think there's already an adventure out there where you meet the Herald of Zax. It's amazing. We thought Devils were a good urban fantasy ancestry. Now, you can imagine if there was a whole epic adventure set in Capital, or a boxed set, that there would be more ancestries just for the big fantasy metropolis. But for our core rules, we felt like 2 ancestries that were more urban friendly would be enough, and Devils are one of those. Devils also changed how ancestries work. The little devils. Originally, your ancestry gave you a couple of cool features, and that was it. No choices. Your ancestry was the choice. But when we had our devil meeting, we talked about whether devils have horns or hooves or tails or even wings. And then the meeting became, do all devils have horns? This is how we did everything in Draw Steel. I would start by saying, here's what I think I know about this ancestry, typically pretty little. And then the whole team would brainstorm ideas, and the ones we all got excited by turned into the prototype. So yeah, it started off as my setting, but when you read through the ancestries section or the gods and religion section, we all had a lot of meetings about all of that, and you are seeing what we all thought were the best ideas. We didn't like saying all devils have horns and tails, or all devils have horns but not tails. A big part of the devil fantasy, it seems to us, is customizing your look. People who like playing devils tend to like deciding how their devil is visually unique in somewhat flamboyant ways, and we like that too. So we decided that all devils should have this one trait, the signature trait that makes them a devil, basically, and then you'd have some points to spend on other traits, horns, tail, hooves, etc. But if you can buy horns or hooves, you could buy other stuff. Other cool things devils could do that doesn't involve how they look. Right away, we felt like this was a very powerful tool, like me. That was super fun. Once we had a prototype of that design, we felt like it was a home run. We all looked around and said, gosh, shouldn't all ancestries work like this? Yeah, they probably should. So no, all devils are not alike. All humans are not alike. We like that. We called it, internally, the Build-A-Bear system. It also opened up a lot of really useful design space for us, as you will see. It was a lot of work going back and redoing all of the other ancestries. Devils were one of the last ancestries we worked on, but it was worth it and sort of fun because now we could include all the cool abilities we had to cut from other ancestries because they were only supposed to have 2 or 3 abilities. So all devils get the Silver Tongue trait. It grants you an interpersonal skill of your choice, and you get an edge during negotiations when you're trying to learn someone's motivations. Now, that is obviously a very modest ability. If you were spending points to buy it, it would probably cost 1 point. That is important because the Build-A-Bear system lets us give different ancestries signature abilities of different cost. If this signature ability would cost 1 point, then you get 3 points to spend on your other devil abilities. If it would cost 2 points, then you get 2 points to spend on your abilities. And that was a huge breakthrough for us. The idea that the human signature trait needs to be balanced against the signature dwarf trait, for instance. Nope. If the human trait is better, then it's a 2-point ability you get for free, and now you have 2 points to spend on your other stuff instead of 3. Devils have 7 other abilities to choose from. Isn't that awesome? I love this game. 7 different abilities, including a tail. Spend 1 point and you can have a tail you could use to stab people every once in a while. You might have goat legs. I mean, they're not called that, but yeah, goat legs. Your speed is 6, 1 better than most ancestries. You might have glowing eyes, which seems pretty popular because unlike almost everything else in this game, it's just straight up 1d10 damage on a trigger. Someone damages you in combat, glowing eyes, 1d10 damage. Sounds like a lot, and it can be if you roll a 9 or a 10. That is a lot, especially at first level. And that's how folks imagine it. Wow, 1d10 damage. Emphasis on the 10. But 1d10 also includes 1 and 2, and that balances out the ability pretty well. Still useful, but not, oh my god, broken. Hellsight lets you see through obscuring effects like fog or darkness, but I also, in my own game, let devil PCs use it to see through some things that are like illusions. Like when Brock's character Moriel, great name, saw the hollow of the bleeding tree, everyone else just saw a dark hole, a cavity in the tree. Moriel could see that was a portal to Equinox. No spoilers. That's just how I felt like running it in that moment. That is not actually what Hellsight does. Do not mistake my table shenanigans as a good idea. You could spend some points and have horns. What kind of horns? Impressive horns. And it says explicitly your horns are larger than normal devil horns. So you can see you could have horns as a devil. No one's going to try to stop you, but they are cosmetic horns unless you spend the points to give them some oomph. In this case, make your save on a 5 or higher instead of a 6 or higher. You can have a prehensile tail. You cannot, unfortunately, have a hensile tail or a post-hensile tail. Those will be DLC. But this means you cannot be flanked, which means you could spend 1 point on barbed tail and 2 points on prehensile tail and be all tail all the time. The 7th and final devil ability is wings. Sure, why not? Devils with wings, classic. They grant flight, but only for a round or 2 at first level. But given how important elevation is in this game, that can still be super useful. Now we get to the lore section of the Devils, and we decided to do things a little differently with the lore for Ancestries. We originally imagined it would be like reading an encyclopedia. But that wasn't really working. It was all very proscriptive. You know, when you say, dwarves are like this, people hear it like an instruction on how to play them rather than a description, to which there are always exceptions, and we didn't like that. Or I should say, we didn't want that to be the first thing we said. And I always assumed there would be Matt Colville fiction somewhere in these books, but I assumed it would be like the fiction from all our other books. Anytime I feel like the players are going to read a rule, like recruiting a black dragon as a follower, and think, yeah, super cool, but how does that work? I write a little short story to show you. And that's why there is fiction in Strongholds and Followers showing you an Illrigger recruiting a black dragon as a follower. I think fiction used in this way, basically as a very complicated illustration, can be a powerful tool. So I decided to switch from a big encyclopedia entry to a small encyclopedia entry and some fiction. In each case, the point of the fiction is to let you meet someone from this ancestry, a typical hero. I thought that opportunity to meet a Dragon Knight or a Time Raider and see not only what they are like, but how other people react to them and sometimes how they react to that reaction was priceless. And I knew, or I suspected, I could also layer a bunch of other stuff in there. So, for instance, if you read the Ancestry fiction, you learn a lot about the whole world. You hear about Capital, the Seven Cities, Ajax, Lord Saxton. You learn a ton of stuff, and if I've done a good job, you don't even realize you've learned it. You just enjoyed reading a fun short story. Now, obviously, tons of people skip the fiction, and Of course, very few people will read the entire book cover to cover. It's not that kind of book. But based on the reception to the game so far, and the way I see people talking about the world online, I think it worked. Folks know a lot about our worlds already. So in the devil fiction, you meet a very typical devil hero. He is from the 7 cities of hell. Devils are the native denizens of that lower world, and we imagine it looks, well, like hell. But it runs a lot like Terry Gilliam's movie, Brazil. Tons of bureaucracy and everybody stabbing each other in the back in a quasi-comic manner. As I write this, I can see that I'm just writing what is already in the fiction, just in a much less entertaining way, so I will stop. If you want to learn about devils as a people, read the fiction. And then I recommend, and this is true of all the Ancestries, if you want to learn more about their culture, read the religion section at the back of the Heroes book. You learn a lot about the 7 cities, all of the timescape and Orden, just reading about only a couple of saints. Now, you may be thinking, wait, aren't devils by definition evil? Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's no alignment in Draw Steel. So there is no protection from evil or detect evil. A person is only evil if you think they are. As the legendary devil playwright Rialkin the Red Pen once wrote in his play A Prince of Vanagar, the last play he wrote before switching to operetta librettos, nothing's good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. People in the timescape tend to be culturally more about order or chaos than classic good versus evil morality. So how you play your devil is up to you. If you read the fiction, you meet a devil who is from hell, not all devils are, and since he's a Draw Steel hero, he has a pretty typical story arc. You tell me, is that dude evil? Well then why are they called devils? Well, that's just what we who speak Kaelian call them. The cultural prejudices that lead normal people to think anybody with red skin, horns, and a tail must be an evil devil are based on members of the Exchange, an organization that trades in souls like corporate stocks. Anyone who knows the ritual can summon a devil and trade their soul for some temporal power. These people are desperate and usually want power for nefarious purposes. So normal folks associate devils with those kinds of outcomes. But devils only want your soul because souls are a currency among the elite of the 7 cities, and you are willingly, from their point of view, trading it away. Most devils don't even really do anything with souls. Unless you're an archdevil, more souls just means more political power. Archdevils and their courts do use souls to power spells and rituals, but you cannot play an archdevil. The last thing I want to say about devils is we made them like that, we made their culture like that, because selling your soul to the devil is a popular cultural trope, and we wanted to deliver on that idea. Now, that soul stuff is still just background. Your character doesn't collect souls, because that's not what this game is about. But we can all imagine, can't we, some future 7 Cities of Hell box set where you can play a whole campaign set in hell, in which case, yeah, shouldn't there be rules for collecting souls? Moving on to the Dragon Knights. Hang on, that's a species? That sounds like an organization. Allow me to explain. You can be a dragon person from anywhere, and most places they are known as draconians, or sometimes dragonfolk. They are not a naturally occurring species. But that phrase, it's actually pretty meaningless in Orden, unless you're talking about birds and horses and stuff. Dragonfolk are created using the ritual of Dracogenesis, which only very powerful wizards can attempt, assuming they can even find a copy of the ritual. Draconians in Vasloria are known as the Dragon Knights, or sometimes the Dragon Phalanx, because almost all the Draconians living in Vasloria were created by good King Omen's wizard Vitae, or are descended from those first generations. Omen and Vitae made the Dragon Phalanx as the ultimate warriors of justice, Omen's greatest knights empowered to ride out among the duchies and baronies, ensuring the rule of law. They were living symbols of justice. During Omen's reign, there was peace and there was justice, and this is why he was known as Good King Omen. Normal people could walk the roads, even wander into a forest, without fear. I imagine that time was very like a fairy tale. 15 years ago, Ajax's conquests brought him to Vasloria, and in battle against the good king, Omen was betrayed by one of his greatest knights and slain. Now, 15 years later, there are no more kings, no more dukes. Ajax took care of that. There are only far-flung baronies trying to keep it together, and the lands between them are a dangerous wilderness. Justice dies. The only law, tooth and claw. Ajax outlawed the Dragon Knights. It is literally illegal to be one of them. In every town, there are always desperate people who can be counted on to sell out any Dragon Knight that wanders by, collecting the bounty. But most people still look to the Dragon Knights as symbols of justice. You get a sense of this if you read the Dragon Knight write-up. Okay, so why did we do that? Well, the answer, because it's cool, or because I was inspired, tends not to satisfy people, and I find that strange. I think people tend to imagine the creative process as being a lot more like following a set of instructions than it really is. Most of the time it really is just, I had a cool idea. I have my own ideas as to why people don't trust the creative process, but we can talk about it this weekend on the live stream. But if you're looking for a greater explanation, I think it has to do with my idea that our job as writers, as directors, as world builders, adventure designers, is to create drama. I really do think that. So building this pathos into this species, saying you can play one of these folks and many people will look up to you, but some people will only see gold and the opportunity to curry favor with a tyrant. You'll inspire people, but you'll never be able to relax. That, to me, gives the species weight and a reality that appeals to me. You can ignore all this and just play a cool dragon person. Remember, most of our customers run in their own world. But in Orden, choosing to play a Dragon Knight is an interesting choice that gives your director a lot of opportunities for drama and gives you, as a player, a lot of interesting questions to answer. Also, it helped the design. Coming up with these cool narrative hooks gave us something to grab onto when we made these folks, all of these folks, because it meant these guys, for instance, aren't just dragon people. There is more going on. That's all. Here's what the Dragon Knights can do. All Dragon Knights get Worm Plate, which gives you a little damage immunity. We liked the idea that your scales should do something, and ignoring damage is pretty cool. Then you get 3 points to spend. You might buy Draconian Guard, which lets you protect yourself or an ally from an attack. Then there's 2 different abilities, sort of 2 sides of the same coin, and they each cost 2, so you can't afford both of them. You can have at most one of them. Draconian Pride and Dragon Breath. We threw Dragon Breath in there because folks assume if they're playing a dragon person that they can breathe fire. Okay, makes sense. But to me, the iconic Dragon Knight would take Draconian Pride, which is a kind of roar you make that damages any enemies around you and pushes them back. So, breathe fire, or, lightning, or whatever turns you on, or a roar. Both are cool. You can have only one at most. Because there are other cool things to spend your points on, like Prismatic Scales, which grants you a second flavor of damage immunity. So you have some immunity to 2 different damage types? Not bad. Or, Remember Your Oath. Willie came up with this, and I love it because it shows how the design can support the fantasy. In this case, the fantasy of being a Dragon Knight, emphasis on the knight. This ability lets you succeed on saving throws on a 4 or higher rather than a 6 or higher. And depending on what kind of bad guys you're fighting, that is a huge boost. But you have to actually say the oath, which means I had to figure out what the oath of the Dragon Phalanx is. I had already written the first 2 lines in the Dragon Knight fiction. I think that's what inspired Willie to come up with this ability. And I had thought, well, good enough. Let the people imagine the rest. Then Willie came up with this ability and I was like, poop. Now I gotta do it. So here's the whole thing. Even should the sun stop in the sky, even should the night last 1,000 years, I will stand forever. I shall not yield. Those who suffer and yearn for justice, I am your sword. I am your shield. I will yield no ground. I will speak no lies. I will stand against all tyrants until the last villain dies. So, yeah, it doesn't exactly rhyme but bits of it rhyme, and that's good enough. I just liked those opening 2 lines, but I didn't want to be locked into that meter. You may notice the opening lines bear a striking similarity to the oath of a certain verdant organization of space cops, my way of telegraphing how I view the Dragon Knights. But I also put some of the rejected names for our game in there. On the short list of names we didn't pick for Draw Steel were Against All Tyrants and Until the Last Villain Dies. And anytime you come out with alternate titles for the thing, there are always people who think, but those are way cooler. Oh, sure, yeah. But we liked the short, punchy name, and it was fun to say when it was time to start combat. The last dragon ability is wings. Yeah, dragons can have wings. Why can't dragon people? It doesn't give you unlimited flight. You can fly a little, but it's still really useful. Just not game-breaking at low levels. Okay, after the Dragon Knight, Dwarves. MCDM dwarves are sort of unique, and this deserves some explanation. I have always thought that part of the fun of fantasy world building was inventing new fantasy species and looking at classic fantasy species through a new lens. If you're just going to do what everybody else did, what is the point of that? I think a lot of my ideas about dwarves come from me trying to take some of the things that are implicit about Tolkien's dwarves and make them explicit. Or saying it another way is, I want to take it to what I considered the logical extreme. So, just like every other ancestry in this game, we imagine this is an alien species who share the same planet with humans and a bunch of other weirdos. MCDM dwarves are not wholly organic. Their skin, at least, and maybe even their skeleton and their muscles, are a silico-organic hybrid. So it's flexible, like our skin, but it acts like armor. I described it as swords spark off their skin. I think they probably can't do this. Their skin isn't that rubbery, but it is flexible. And I never imagined dwarves in Orden as having beards, or any hair at all. I imagined them as short, stocky, hairless humanoids. And I imagine them using the same medieval tech that humans use. Axes, shields. Well, this is why these are MCDM dwarves and not Matt Colville dwarves, because I am not the only person who works here. Jason, our art director, just thought that was boring, and he had his own ideas inspired by my ideas. He said, well, couldn't they have something like hair? Crystal growths? And I said, sure. My reaction wasn't so much, oh my God, that's so cool. It's more, well, if Jason is excited, this is going to look awesome. And I was right. And being Jason, he had no interest in grounding these guys in anything like medieval technology. He keyed off something I said in the meeting, which was, there was once, millennia ago, 3 different species of dwarves in Orden: stone, fire, and steel. And each was more advanced. The stone dwarves were the low-tech dwarves, and the steel dwarves are the very high-tech dwarves. But there was a war, and the steel dwarves lost, and they were all eradicated. The fire dwarves said, screw this planet, and went to quintessence, and the stone dwarves stayed behind. But they remember their older siblings and still sort of look up to them. Jason thought, well, wouldn't they try to model the steel dwarves' tech in their own way? Sure. So Jason made them, basically, steampunk dwarves, or maybe steam-powered would be better, because steampunk very strongly implies a Victorian aesthetic, which these dwarves are not. But they can do electrical or even gunpowder things using steam tech. And I love what Jason did with Dazar, the iconic dwarf. He gave Dazar this cool helmet. It looks almost like some kind of ceremonial headwear. But even Dazar does not know the stone dwarves make helmets that look like this because of their dim memory of their steel dwarf siblings. They made helmets like that because these little circles are places to attach air and coolant hoses from a spacesuit. The stone dwarves don't remember anything about those suits other than how they looked, so they model the look, having no idea it ever had a function. I love that. I love everything about that. Our dwarves are cool. So now we had our own dwarves. Somebody, I don't remember who it was, probably Jordy, because he did the first pass on enemy dwarves in the monster book, said, well, aren't crystals sort of the source of psionic energy in Orden? And I said, yeah, more or less. It is more complicated than that, but yeah. So he gave our dwarves psionic abilities. Brilliant. This is what makes it fun for me to work here. Yeah, a lot of these ideas start as mine. It's my pitch. But then other folks here plus it. They add to it until these guys look wholly original to me. I get to be surprised by them the way I would be if I bought this book sight unseen. Our dwarves, along with our orcs, cause some people to get a little frisky. And when they get frisky, they use some very interesting language. Why did you change dwarves? We don't really know how to answer that question because it never occurred to us that dwarves in fantasy were real. There is no default fantasy dwarf. Everybody imagines these species differently. Some people imagine dwarves like Snow White dwarves. Terry Pratchett loved that. Some people imagine Tolkien dwarves, but those people are not all imagining the same thing. Do you mean Tolkien movie dwarves or Tolkien novel dwarves? And if you mean Tolkien movie dwarves, which movie? Bakshi Gimli is pretty different from Peter Jackson Gimli, and they're both really different from the other Peter Jackson dwarves. And hey, if you mean Tolkien novel dwarves, what does that even mean? I had the joy recently of watching my friend Dr. Jackson Crawford giving his reactions in a series of videos to rereading The Lord of the Rings for the first time since he was a kid, basically. And he is constantly asking, what are dwarves and elves? Because weirdly, they are not described in any detail. You're just sort of supposed to know what they look like and how their biology works. Tolkien does not actually explain these species. Of course not. He's not a sci-fi writer. There's actually a really cool letter he wrote to a fan, I think, I'm going to paraphrase, where he sympathizes with the letter writer who wished that he had made dwarves and elves more alien instead of just different flavors of human. He talks about pushing things to be more alien and says, but then I would have been a science fiction writer and that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, fair enough. But I actually like imagining these folks as different alien species all inhabiting the same planet, because that is an interesting lens to view this stuff through. So I consider these guys a huge success. I love our dwarves. They're still short Klingons in my mind, but they look like this. I have had the pleasure of being a player in a draw steel adventure run by my friend Matt O'Driscoll, and he wanted to use dwarves as bad guys. Then he saw our dwarves in the monster book and he got real excited because these guys can do some insane stuff D20 fantasy dwarves do not do. And player side, as a player, I know this sounds like marketing wank, but this really is how I feel. I felt like fighting MCDM dwarves felt so new and different compared to classic fantasy dwarves, whatever those are, that it made me, in my 50s, feel like I did when I was 15 and the entire genre was new and uncharted to me. Anyway, that's what dwarves are. What can they do? Well, the default dwarf trait is runic carving. Jason figured if these guys have stone-like skin, maybe they don't tattoo themselves, they carve themselves. And we figured maybe different ritual carvings could do different things. So all dwarves come with 3 ritual carving tattoo options. You can choose a species and know when a member of that species is within 20 feet, or you can shed light, or you can communicate telepathically with someone as long as you know them and they are within 1 mile of you. Now, you might think, wait, that light one is pretty useless compared to the other 2, especially since this isn't a dungeon crawler. Yes, that is true, but it only takes 10 minutes to change your rune. So you're not ever stuck with one. You get all 3 and you can swap them out as needed. Then you get 3 points to spend on Great Fortitude, which means you cannot be weakened, and weakened is both a common condition and annoying. Grounded, which grants +1 stability, leaning into the dwarves are literally denser and way more than other people idea. Spark off your skin is 2 points and grants you bonus stamina, a lot of bonus stamina, and it goes up every echelon. Stand tough, 1 point, grants you +1 might whenever you're trying to resist an enemy's potency check, and it grants an edge on some might tests. And finally, you can buy Stone Singer for 1 point, which lets your character treat solid rock as though it were like plasticine. That's our dwarves. I love these guys, and nothing would bring me more joy than seeing Drawsteel grow to the point where we could make like a complete book of dwarves with more dwarf options, lots of cultural stuff, maps of their cities. I would love to see that for all our ancestries, but that is the future, if we're lucky. Next up, the elves. There are 2 flavors of elves, Wode Elves and High Elves. They're basically our version of Wood Elves and High Elves, but I want to talk about how they are different from other fantasy version of elves and why. First of all, in Orden, a woad is a kind of forest, rare and different from normal forests. In Vasloria, basically everybody is surrounded by forests, but there's usually only one woad in a given area. Woads are known as elf-haunted forests, but really, when people say haunted, they mean dangerously weird, not literally possessed by ghosts. So a woad elf isn't literally an elf of the forest. They are an elf native to the elf forests, which are this unique thing. Before we go down that rabbit hole, there is something you don't really need to know because it probably doesn't have anything to do with you or your world or your game. But in Orden, elf means lots of different things. It means the normal elves you can play, the woad elves, the high elves, and soon the shadow elves. But it also means just fairies. Yeah, little people with butterfly wings. Those are also in development, by the way. Most humans in Vasloria, they live in little villages in the middle of nowhere, and elves and dwarves and all that, those are nearly mythical things. Heroes see these folks all over the place, but normal people lead very sheltered lives and they conflate all these ideas. Elf also means one of these guys, the Celestials, also known as the True Elves. This is an astral celestial, probably a bad guy, and probably like 12, 15 feet tall. A lot of legends about the elves are really memories of these people. So when you read the lore, which obviously you don't need to do, but many people do, when you read the lore, you hear about the Celestials and what they did. The Celestials made the flying cities, which are now all crashed, except for one. The Celestials made whole species, all the Fae species like dryads and sylphs, but also like shambling mounds and centaurs and all that. The Celestials made the Wode Elves and the High Elves to act as servants. The Wode Elves tend to the forest and keep them appropriately pretty and dangerous, and the High Elves are like lore masters and librarians. But it's a mistake to think that the Sun Elves created the High Elves because they needed librarians. No, the Celestials were demigods, and more demigod than demigod. To them, making a new species is just a fashionable thing to do. They made these people and then decided what to do with them. The Celestials were in the world before the coming of the Dwarves and the law of time. So Celestials remember a time before cause and effect, when the world was way more interesting and more fun, and magic was a lot friskier. That's what a Wode is. Originally, all the world was Wode. Now only tiny pockets still hold the power of the true elves. And someday, maybe even those last pockets will disappear. Eventually, there was a war and a great tragedy, and the god of the elves grew disgusted with Orden and created his own world, Arcadia. That's like elf utopia. And the Celestials left Orden and joined their god, leaving most of their children behind. Okay, but why? Why do all this? What is the point? Can't you just have leafy elves and snobby elves and move on? Sure, lots of games do that. But again, what is the point of doing your thing exactly the way someone else did? No one gives you an award for being exactly like anybody else. And I am a big fan of Tolkien as a writer and as a world builder. I guess all fans of Tolkien are fans of his writing and world building, but I mean, I am more obsessed with his process than the result. I love The Lord of the Rings, but I've read it maybe 5 times in my life, and I'm basically always rereading the history of The Lord of the Rings. In the books, for one thing, it's clear to me Legolas is a different kind of thing from Elrond. And personally, I detect a difference between Elrond and folks like that one Glorfindel who fought an army of Balrogs. I think I see in the work 3 different kinds of elves. Hobbit elves are normal Legolas elves. Lord of the Rings elves are Elrond elves. So Wode elves and High Elves. I just think Elrond is like a 10th level High Elf. Actually, I think there might be more content after 10th level, like an Immortals expansion for Drawsteel, and then Elrond would be one of those. Still a High Elf, just really high level. The point is, those are both PC elves, elves you can play. But in the Silmarillion, there are elves you definitely cannot play. They were never first level. They started as demigods. And so, the Celestials. Tolkien didn't need to explain these things because he worked on all this stuff at different periods of his life and for different reasons. But I enjoy trying to fit all that into some kind of playable framework, and so these are our elves. Wode Elves have a super unique look, and people really seem to vibe with this. We decided, again, a lot of this came from the art team, but we were all in a call together. We were all excited by all these ideas. We decided to make these guys look more alien than generic fantasy elves. Wide eyes set far apart, big scoopy ears that are probably prehensile, meaning they can just decide to move them around if they want. Also, it's not obvious in every picture. Their hair is really dense, like basically fur. They're big-eyed, big-eared, furry elves. We figured these would be useful adaptations for life in the forest, but also, we just thought it was cool, and we still think that. Wode Elves get the following abilities. They all get an elf glamour, all elves do. This is an innate magical way of changing their appearance. But while they can and do use magic to change their appearance, it's not really something they are aware of. It's closer to breathing. We do not normally think about breathing, but we can do it manually if we need to. But also, elves don't think of magic as being a thing you do. It's just part of the world. To elves, magic is natural. So when you ask an elf, how did you do that? They literally do not know what you mean. They would say, well, you know how to do things without thinking about it, like breathing and metabolizing food and maintaining homeostasis. Same thing. Humans do not generally find this a satisfying answer. Wode Elf Glamour makes you good at hiding. Then you get 3 points to spend. Forest Walk is 1 point, which lets you ignore difficult terrain when shifting. Very handy. Quick and Brutal is 1 point and lets you take a main action and a move action when you crit. Because we imagine Wode Elves, or Wode Elf Heroes, which is more to the point, we imagine Wode Elf Heroes as being basically guerrilla warriors. Otherworldly Grace is 2 points, and it's about how elves are sort of like Vulcans from Star Trek. They have powerful minds and greater reflex compared to humans. They succeed on saving throws on a 5 or higher instead of a 6 or higher. That's 10% better. Wode Elves also get Revisit Memory, 1 point. We liked the idea of elves as being physiologically different from humans. These are alien species. Elves don't really remember things the way we do. They relive them. They experience them again. I can remember the end of my mom's life without experiencing how it felt. Elves, that's a lot harder for them. They gain an edge on tests to recall lore. Actually, all elves get Otherworldly Grace and Revisit Memory. We like that. We liked that the Build-A-Bear system lets us say these species are related to each other, so they share some traits. But you don't have to buy them if you want to be different. For 1 point, your Wode Elf can be swift, +1 speed. Hopefully you can see how your dwarf can be strong, even if you're not playing a might-based hero. Your elf can have good reflexes, be fast, be good at combat, even if you're not playing an agility-based hero. Finally, for 2 points, you can buy, I feel like Uncle Albert from the Uncle Albert's Guides. Finally, you can buy the Wode Defends, which is a new signature ability. Some ancestries get these, so you can get signature abilities from your class, your kit, or your ancestry. It's a pretty good attack. Range 10, a little damage, and a slow. That's Wode Elves. And I guess they have a hidden special ability. They can break the rules of alphabetizing. Once I decided it would be better to meet these people in the fiction rather than just describe them to you in dry prose, I realized the fiction could form a multi-part story, or more than one multi-part story. So I wrote some Wode Elf fiction and some High Elf fiction, and it's one vignette in 2 parts. And folks liked the fiction. Then I realized, hang on, W comes after H. So this story is backwards, and not in a good way. And then James said, hey, it's our book. We can make an exception. When I explained this, our lead tester, Pesto Enthusiast, said, they're in alphabetical order. And now that is canon. Wode Elves have the power to make W come before H under certain editorial pressures. High Elves who lack this ability gain the following. For free, you get your own Elf Glamour. High Elf Glamour grants you an edge on presence tests and bonuses with certain skills. Basically, you are more appealing. And the magic is, it doesn't matter what other people consider appealing. If somebody thinks smart people are appealing, you seem smart. You aren't actually smarter, you just seem that way, because that's what they find appealing. For some reason, folks imagine this means if I saw an elf, they might look like Salma Hayek. But if you saw that same elf, they might look like Timothy Chalamet? And that always confuses me. No, we both see the same elf. It's their presence, their personality we interpret as pleasing. But I think if you saw a high elf corpse, you might just go, oh, that's just a normal creature. Yeah, it's magic. You can spend 2 points and have another glamour, the glamour of terror. You can frighten enemies foolish enough to strike you. Don't they know who you are? You can get Graceful Retreat for 1 point, which grants +1 speed when using the Disengage action. Hard to pin down in combat are the High Elves. You also get Otherworldly Grace and Revisit Memory, like all the elves do, and they all work the same way. And for 2 points, your High Elf can have Unstoppable Mind, meaning you cannot be dazed. I think these elves are awesome. I think they are distinct from the other fantasy elves in fun and thoughtful ways, but you can still make a classic fantasy elf with these abilities if you chose to do that. Okay, last ancestry for this video, so this is part 1, because damn, this is already super long. The Hakaan. The Hakaan are half-giants, basically, except not half in the dumb way where a giant and a human have sex. Half as in half-sized, diminished. Still epic, but not full giant epic. Like the Dragon Knights and Devils, these folks are in here because it's fun to play a giant. Sure, we could have made a bunch of really alien species, but that gets weird and complicated. I actually originally wrote a whole chunk of text here about my attitude toward this stuff and why we generally went with classic fantasy nonsense with our own spin on it. But the more passionate I get about this stuff, the more it becomes about me, which is not my goal. So probably I'll explain that stuff in the post-video live stream this weekend. And I will spare you my ranting now. Anyway, yeah, the Hakaan are giant folk that you can play, and they're sort of unique in that they're the only ancestry that was heavily influenced by one of my players. My friend Justice played a Hakaan, and at this point, I didn't really know anything about them culturally. Because he is of Persian descent and is making a point to learn more about that culture, he asked, could the Hakaan be sort of Persian adjacent culturally? Of course, I said, yes, love that. Jason especially loved it because it gave him something fun to inspire him. So no, these guys didn't literally come from the Achaemenid Persian Empire. They are their own thing, but the look and feel are inspired by that real-world ancient culture. In Vasloria, specifically in Omen's Land, the Hakaan live in and around the Barrow Hills. Their normal environment is mountains and foothills. So the humans in Omen's Land call them the Barrowmen, which sometimes has to be explained to the Hakaan. They are long-lived and solitary, living in small villages. I think actually they're pretty heavily influenced by the giants in Stephen R. Donaldson's fantasy novels, although I didn't think of that until I was writing the script. All Hakaan are big. That's the name of the trait. It just means they are large, and that affects how hard they are to grapple and some other noodly rules about size. You can pick up all is a feather for 1 point, giving you an edge anytime you need to lift or carry something. So you're strong, but no bonus to might. That's one of the reasons we went with might instead of strength. Might is about physical strength, but it's also about martial prowess. It's more general than just physical strength. For 2 points, you could buy the, I would say, main defining Hakaan ability, Doomsight. Originally, all Hakaan had Doomsight because we didn't have the Build-A-Bear system, and that annoyed some people who wanted to play Hakaan, but didn't want this. Well, now it's optional. Ardashir, the iconic Hakaan hero you meet in the core rules, does not have Doomsight, but his brother does. Doomsight means you know how you're going to die, but not when exactly. You get a sense, maybe, when it gets close. The Hakaan were originally the Hakaan, a tribe of stone giants in Upper Vanagar who made a deal with the Vanagar trickster god Holkatya, in which they would trade some of their great strength for the power to see the future. But Holkatya is the god of deceit, and the only future the Hakaan can see is the moment of their own death. And if this sounds like we just lifted the Cyclopses from Krull, I am here to say, with 100% sincerity, but 0% honesty, that this is pure coincidence. The Doomsight literally means you cannot die until you decide to. And when you decide to, you become, for a few moments at most, an unstoppable killing machine. And then you die forever. Pretty cool, but totally optional. You might spend a point to get Forceful, +1 distance when you try and force move someone, which is a big deal in this game. I realize when I say force move like that, it sounds like I'm talking about the Jedi using the Force or whatever, but it's just because I played and ran Champions and 2 different Marvel superhero RPGs for years, and forced movement is a hallmark of superhero RPGs. Great Fortitude is 2 points, and you get to ignore the weakened condition, or you might stand tough for 1 point, and it's easier for you to resist attacks that target your might. Both of these are exactly the same as the dwarf abilities, and why not? Who says every single trait needs to be unique? If 2 different species are both really strong, give them the really strong traits. They each have other I am very strong abilities, which are unique. One of the things I love about this system is, once there's enough ancestries, and we're working on 8 more for the December crowdfunder, then you'll be able to make an entirely new ancestry just by mixing and matching abilities from existing ancestries. There'll be almost 100 unique ancestral abilities this time next year. Okay, that's the first 6 ancestries, and I have to stop for now. Got a lot of videos to make, but there will be a part 2. Get excited, because we only just did the coolest ancestries. The even cooler ancestries are yet to come. I learned a lot running Draw Steel, and a lot of it is useful advice for anybody running any RPG. So more running the game videos next year, but right now I got 2 more Draw Steel videos to make. The next one is about, well, it's sort of about you and what you're doing with this game. And about us and what we've been doing. You'll see. No spoilers. I'll be live on YouTube this Sunday morning to talk about all this or whatever's on your mind, and I may read some of the Ancestry fiction if I think I can get away with it. Some people think this is egomaniacal, some people think it is fun, and they are both correct. I actually had some completely different write-ups y'all have never seen for a couple of these Ancestries. Those would be fun to read. Until next time, be seeing you.